And here we are again for another tutorial with the Violet Wolf. These are bugle beads. They are not seed beads, but they are made of the same materials, glass. Here you can see I've used the brick stitch pattern as I've been showing in my tutorials thus far. We're going to make this shape right here, but as you can see, there are a lot of different things you can do just with the brick stitch and bugle alone. It's kind of really fun to play with them. Here I have the fringe along the bias, and here I've done kind of a ladder stitch. Just wanted to throw in there to show how versatile that bugles can actually be. As you can see in other tutorial videos, people do all kinds of crazy shapes, but this is the shape that we're going to do today for this tutorial. So as to start, I always use my size 10 beading needle, yes, and fireline I prefer 6 pounds, and measure out about 60-65 inches so you don't have to weave any more ends in than you have to. So here, grab 2 bugle beads to start, and each bead will be a column. So I wanted to do the tutorial here with the bugle beads for one single bead next to each other in the foundation row, if that makes sense. When you use seed beads like this and you just use a single bead all along the foundation, it can feel very unstable and uncomfortable, and like you don't really have a grip on it until you start building on top of it. So if I can get you to use single beads all along the edge or all along the foundation row with the bugle, you can have kind of a better hang of it. And you have to be careful when you pull your thread, because bugle beads, they have very sharp edges and they will cut your thread, even the fireline. It's pretty crazy. So I'm going to use some colors that give it kind of a sunburst look. And so it'll be 2 blacks, 1 red, 1 orange, 2 yellow, 1 orange, 1 red, and 2 black. I usually use matte black, but I left those beads at the bead shop yesterday. See these little black things? It's just like the little waxy stuff that's on the fireline. Don't freak out. If you see little black things on my fingers in any of these tutorials, that's what it is. It's just from the fireline. Not a big deal. So yes, I'm teaching you guys this technique that I do for the diamonds because I do want to do another seed bead tutorial where the foundation row is just one single bead all the way across. And I want you guys to get a hang of doing these motions before you have to deal with something that feels a little wobbly and precarious. So here I'm going to follow through with my colors. And again, I like to just hold on to them and really baby the thread in this first row, because I don't want the edge of these bugle beads, like the inner edge, to cut my thread. And here's where I switch to the gold, and I'll do 2 gold, so that way when I build upon it, it can make a nice little diamond shape within my diamond shape, if that makes sense. And so basically from here you just mirror that colorway. And I'm going to go in real time for this foundation row, and I'll take you along for the second row, and then I'll most likely speed things up here. But I'll let you see the progression in case you want to check your colors. And for certain, feel free to change up the colors if you'd like to. I do all colors in this pattern. I like to do an icy blue that pushes out into a darker blue. And then I've done the green, and I think that's about it. I do lots of rainbows with bugles. So these can be very gratifying because they're so long and you get a lot of area established pretty quickly. And once you build up upon this foundation row, it'll stiffen up enough to where you don't have to worry about these particular earrings curling too much, or at all really. Also, if you work a little loosely, it can prevent curling. If you have a very, very tight tension in your beadwork, it can curl. As with like knitting and crocheting, if you have a very tight tension in your stitches, it can make a smaller piece. So like with the seed beads, you grab 2 beads every time you start a row. And then you go into that second stitch right there. And here you want to just tug nice and gently and coax that bead into the shape that you want it, just like that. If you try to pull them into place with your thread, it might sever your thread, so you don't want to do that. And just be sure not to go back under that stitch, because then your working thread won't have anything to hold on to, and then poof, your beads just fall back off. We don't want that. And be sure to work up through that second bead and then down through the first bead, and that'll really solidify those 2. See how it's kind of open at the bottom? This extra little step keeps those nice and snug next to each other. I've forgotten before, and I've skipped that step just out of, being on autopilot, and I've had to go back in and weave it around. So you end up having to do the work anyway, so just get it done at the beginning. So now we're stacking them on top of each other, which means we're going to lose one of our beads in this second row. Oh, look at this. This happens if you want a longer little tail right there, so you can feel like you have some insurance. Feel free to do that. And in this particular design, because I worked an even number of beads in the foundation row, that tail from the initial, from the very beginning that we worked, is going to be on the working edge. It's not a big deal. It's just kind of a nuisance at first. And when you work into it at the end, I'll show you, but it can be a little looser than if we were working on the other side of the foundation row. You just have to be more mindful, but it's not a huge deal. If it makes you happy to weave in that piece and bring it back around to the bottom so that you don't have to deal with it at the end of this second row, you can do that too. Here we go. I only used 1 yellow bead in the middle to stack right on top of those 2 yellow beads. So as you can see, I just tucked that little tail behind me, and I'm holding it and just work real slowly and mindfully here, because you have that loose little bottom there. And that's it. So I just tug on the tail to get it nice and tightened from that foundation row, just like that. And then tug on the working thread, and then boom, there you go. And don't mind those pliers, they're not my fancy favorite ones. I also left those at the bead shop. And then you just work all the way up through. So here I'm getting a little annoyed with the tail, so I'm just going to go ahead and weave it down through that bottom row so I don't have to deal with it. So again, you can do that at the very beginning, or you can ignore it, but if it starts bothering you, just grab that big eye needle and work it down through the next bead. Big eye needles are great like that. You can work either side of them. All you have to do is slip that thread down the big eye to make it work for you. So once you work this last row that has color in it, the red in the middle, the red bugle bead in the middle of these two black bugles on either side, the next 3 rows will be all black. And the very last row will consist of 2 bugle beads. This is important because we're going to be working a jump ring into that row so that you can hang your ear wire from it and not worry about anything slipping off of anything. I've learned my lesson, not doing it again. So here's 6mm soldered jump rings. You want them to be soldered, whether you use a larger gauge or a smaller gauge, you want them to be soldered because you don't want a gap between the wires. If you have a gap in your jump ring, this entire step is totally moot. So don't forget that important detail. So you get your 2 bugles and your jump ring. You work into that second stitch right there. And do this very deliberately and slowly so that there's no rush. You want to get everything nice and snug and perfect and where it's going to be. And once you're done, you want it to stay in place. You don't want that jump ring moving all over the place. So this is worth just taking a little bit of extra time and care. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling that jump ring to be sitting at the top of the 2 bugles. And like you do at the beginning of every row, you work back up that second bugle and you pull, but not too much. You want that jump ring to be able to sit on top of those 2 bugles, not in between. And then work back up one more time to secure the bottom of the 2 bugles so that they'll sit snugly next to each other. So that jump ring's gonna want to slide down, but just keep messing with it, constantly adjusting so that everything sits where you want it to sit. And sometimes I'll take my needle and I'll do like I just did, and I'll pull up and I'll go back down that first bugle, so you can see, and then just work all the way through the edge, all the way across, along the edge into each bugle. You may not be able to get all the way through. That's fine. Those beading needles are only so long. And there we go. Voila. So we have our jump ring, our soldered jump ring, nice and snug at the top, and that's where we'll attach our ear wire. And then with the same thread, we will continue to work the same pattern. So here, as you see, we've added this soldering we've added this soldered jump ring at the bottom, and then we've worked all the way up the edge to the very bottom, which is now the top of our work. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. When we worked our second row off the foundation, we're continuing to work a second row to establish our diamond shape. So this is important because I don't make 2 triangles and then weave them together, which I could, but I think that's more work. And plus you have 2 foundation rows at that point, and I don't want that. I want a nice stack, and I want them to mirror. And I guess if you did it the other way, they would technically mirror each other, but it's just a whole extra row that we don't need. This makes it nice and clean. And I'll go ahead and show you that first row that we're going to work. Just so you can see it come together. So in every row you work up, clearly you're losing a bead. So on this pattern, we just reduce that bead in the middle so that we get that sunburst shape. And here, all you have to do is just work back through. This is where we would put that jump ring like we did the other side, but we don't need 2 jump rings. That would be silly. And then you work all the way back up to the edge, and then just weave this end however you want. I like to go all the way up and then all the way down, and then work maybe 2 or 3 beads across, like inward. And that'll pretty much take care of that. You don't have to worry about that thread ever coming loose. I like to work all the way up through that little foundation row, just so it, to me in my mind, it feels more secure. I don't like gaps. They're gonna happen because even with delicas, no bead is exactly the same size, but sometimes if you're picky when you're choosing beads to put on your needle, you can get beads to be as close in size to each other as you can. So yeah, there we go, just up and down, and then a few across, and then you're done. You're good to go. Whoa. And this one needs to be woven because that was part of our foundation from the very first 2 beads that we did. So it's good to weave that one through. Even if technically if you wanted to cut it here, you could, but I would just rather play it safe. And then as you can see, with the big eye needle, weaving in ends is really convenient when you can just kind of zigzag it through instead of having to turn the needle to the tip. And then get that one. And this one, wove that, but you get the point. And any little phrase, this guy will take care of it. And there you go. There you have it. And there are my bugle diamonds. So now, like I've showed you, I like to use gold filled. See, I already pre-opened this one, but you get the deal. You get it. And then I usually like to check to make sure everything is in place. Sometimes I'll twist the beads so that the prettiest sides are showing. It really doesn't matter. And with the jump ring, it's kind of gonna lay in a way that you will see both sides. But I find my prettiest side to face outward. Make sure that's closed. And there you go. Make the other one and you'll have a pair. So thanks guys, I hope this was helpful.